Hi, my name is James Griffiths. Welcome back to the channel and another instalment of my series Revisiting, where I look back on one particular album. And today's record I've chosen because I've just recently acquired a new copy of it. The Plastic Ono Band, John Lennon and Shaved Fish. For many years I had this record in my collection. I don't know how many years going back, but I dug up my copy a while ago and it was in a serious state of disrepair. I went online, looked for another copy and found this. And this is an original pressing, got it from eBay, really nice condition, and what a great cover that is. Designed by Roy Kahara and painted by Michael Bryan, but for each of the tracks on the record get a little picture. On the back we have the fish. Shaved fish, I think it was a Japanese expression. A fairly significant compilation really, and it remains so because I think it was the only record compilation that was put together during John's lifetime in which John had a hand. It came out in October of 1975 and it was during a period where things were starting to come together for John, if you will excuse the pun, after a long period of uncertainty, soul searching. He'd had his Lost Weekend, the split with Yoko, the time he'd spent with LA and May Pang. That was all behind him, and Yoko and John got back together in '75. Of course, he did the album Walls and Bridges, the rock and roll album, and Yoko was pregnant again, and I suppose John was on the cusp of that 5-year break that he was going to have, being a father to Sean. Immigration issues had all been sorted out. He got his green card, he was allowed to stay in America. So this record caught him at quite a nice moment in his life really, and I think it was a time for him where he was looking back on his career to date and trying to put something together, a package together that would really try to represent what he'd done. So this record is also interesting in that the track list basically spans 1969 through to 1974. When the record begins, there's an excerpt of Give Peace a Chance, which was recorded in 1969. It was a hit in the UK and the US, but this was before the Beatles had broken up. It was before Abbey Road was released. And it takes John from the days immediately before the breakup of the band all the way through to the cusp of his 5-year hiatus. So, it's an intriguing time span. The record has a curious running order. It's not exactly chronological. It kind of starts off chronological and then it soon gives that up. So you get certain sort of oddities. So, for example, you have Imagine at the start of side 2, and that comes after Woman is the Nigger of the World, which had been on the Sometime in New York City album, which had come out in 1972. And then also you have Mind Games coming before Number 9 Dream, which doesn't really make sense. So I don't know whether John thought about the running order and he was less concerned with it being a chronology and more concerned with it having a flow to the record, I guess. Some of these singles were not necessarily easy things to track down after the event. If you were a fan in later years, in the 1970s, in the second half of the 1970s, you were not necessarily going to find nice 45 copies of Cold Turkey, Instant Karma, Power to the People. These things were not necessarily in common currency. So it was nice to have them all collected together on one record. Side 2, I guess, less interesting because, he goes into, apart from Happy Christmas War Is Over, there's just a run of album tracks, essentially. And I think the track listing, it does make for a slightly uneven sequence of tracks, but anyway, it is what it is. I think the idea is that John was just, like I said, trying to draw some strings together, trying to draw a line under a fairly major phase in his career. So, as I said, it begins with an excerpt of Give Peace a Chance. I think a bit of a shame that it didn't have the full version on there. The original version of the song, it's not that long, but I guess he just thought that an excerpt would be best. So what he does actually, he has an excerpt at the beginning and then an excerpt at the end as well. So the record starts and ends with Give Peace a Chance. And this song is more of a slogan than a song, I suppose, but it was certainly an incredibly influential song. And then it goes into Cold Turkey, and that came out just after the release of Abbey Road, October '69. and it was the first ever solo credit for John Lennon. It was a song famously which he'd offered to the Beatles. He had offered it to them, but they said that they didn't want to record it. I think for them it was just, going outside the pale, really. Eric Clapton on guitar, Ringo on drums, with an incredibly dry, hard sound, very, very bleak record, but also quite exciting. Sonically exciting. A fair hit, got to number 30 in the US and number 14 in the UK, and it was the first record ever credited to John Lennon solo. Then it jumps to Instant Karma in 1970. This one had been written very quickly. He'd written it on the 27th of January in 1970, and it was recorded 10 days later. It was one of John's kind of it was called Instant Karma. I think he was definitely in the mood to just get things done nice and sharpish. This was before the release of the McCartney album, so the reality of the Beatles split was not yet out there in the public domain. This song had a bit of a roll call of the great and the good on it. You had George Harrison, Klaus Voormann, the Beatles' old comrade from the Hamburg days, Alan White, later to play on Imagine, and of course he was later going to be a stalwart of the Yes lineup in the 1970s. Billy Preston as well, and this is just a great catchy pop song really. It's a Phil Spector production. You've got all the patented Spector effects going on, echo, hand claps, tambourine, multi-dubs, pianos, and there was a famous Top of the Pops appearance of this one where John appeared with his short hair, Yoko wearing a white bandage over her eyes, and this really did feel like John striking out. Start of a new decade, striking out on his own with a very strong, catchy song which captured the zeitgeist, I think, to an extent. I think the concept of karma had been around in the counterculture for some time. Maybe it hadn't crossed over into the mainstream culture yet. Maybe to the average pop punter in 1970 the word karma wouldn't really have meant anything, but I think to John it certainly would have had some hippie connotations. UK number 5, US number 3, so quite a sizable hit. And then we moved to track 4, which is Power to the People, which was the following year, March 1971. And this came out 3 months after the release of the original Plastic Ono Band record, or the pair of records that John and Yoko had done. Scary, stripped down, primal scream type music really in many ways. But Power to the People was another rousing anthem. I don't think it was a song that John was particularly wedded to. It's a great song, I think. It showed him with his pop head on firmly, and we have some reasonable chart positions. UK number 6 and US number 11, and this one featured Bobby Keys on saxophone. The song was recorded during the Imagine sessions, which happened at Ascot, John's home studio, in February 1971, but the song doesn't really have much of a flavour from those sessions really. It seems to have a sound all of its own, and it reflected at the time, I think, it reflected some of John's interests. He was talking a lot in interviews about communism, and clearly that fed back into the lyrics of Imagine and this idea of power to the people and giving power back to the masses and everything. I don't know if John ever had a very carefully worked out philosophy, but he was certainly on the cusp of that period where he was going to be heavily involved in the struggle of the proletariat and all that protest stuff that he got up to in New York. A really interesting time in his life. He described Power to the People as like a newspaper song, so I think he kind of saw it a bit like the New York City album. It was the beginning of that period where he kind of saw himself as doing almost musical reportage. So those are the opening 4 tracks, and those are the singles. Those are the songs that you wouldn't have been able to get on an album. And then you get a kind of jarring effect then, because it goes into Mother, which is the opening track of the Plastic Ono Band record. Very, very dark, cold and bleak song. I'm not sure if it quite works in context, out of the context of the Plastic Ono Band record. It doesn't seem an ideal song to be on a compilation, but it's it's there. And then side one ends with "Woman is the N-word of the world." Can't say that word anymore. And this obviously was a track from the New York City album. It had been inspired by an article or an interview which Yoko Ono had given in Nova magazine, where she'd made that comment. Missed the US top 40, so I think it did come out in America, but it was banned in the UK. And I think it's a great song. I mean, yeah, that word maybe, these days it gives you pause for thought, really. And I think John was very wrong about that word in a way. I know he gave interviews at the time saying that he thought that in future times that word would become common currency, and how wrong was he? So anyway, that's the end of side one. And then side two, I guess we don't need to say too much about that. Starts with Imagine, which was obviously the song that he became known for mostly after his death in 1980. Remarkably, didn't get a single release at the time in the UK, which not that many people know, I don't think. In fact, I think it was when this album came out that it finally saw a single release in the UK in 1975. But it didn't top the charts, got to number 6. And back in April 72, when it was released in the US, it also didn't make number 1. It got to number 3, which is extraordinary when you think about it. Then Whatever Gets You Through the Night, so he gives you a little jump there. He jumps forward to the Walls and Bridges album, the track that he did with Elton John, which was a big hit. It was a US number 1. The inspiration for this song came from the black evangelist Reverend Ike. It was musically based on Rock Your Baby by George McCrae. And the famous story with this one is that Elton John, who of course played piano and sang on the record, he told John that it was going to be number 1, and John didn't believe him. So they made a wager in the studio, and John said that if it got to number 1, he would agree to appear live with Elton. And it did get to number 1, and Elton called in his bet, and John appeared with Elton at Madison Square Garden in November 1975. Then Mind Games, the opening track from the previous album from 1973. Brilliant song, absolutely fantastic. I think easily the best song on that album. A US number 18, UK number 26. Came out in October 1973. The song was inspired by a book again, so John again revealing his literary references. It was Mind Games, The Guide to Inner Space by Robert Masters and Gene Houston. And it features the line "Yes is the answer," which references back to John and Yoko's first meeting when he went to see Yoko's exhibition, and there was the exhibit of the stepladder where he had to go up the stepladder and hold a magnifying glass to the ceiling, and when he did, he saw the word "yes" up there. And apparently he always said that that was the reason that he ended up going with Yoko, because he was so taken with that positive message. So it's quite a nice song in that respect. It kind of keys into certain aspects of Beatles history, but it's a fantastic song anyway, really, really brilliant. Check out the version by Sinead O'Connor if you haven't heard it. Brilliant. Then he jumps forward again to number 9, Dream, which again is from Walls and Bridges. A reasonable hit, number 9 in the US, number 23 in the UK. He later said that this song was just churned out with no inspiration, but I don't necessarily think he was knocking it. The song essentially came to him in a dream, including the strange refrain, and let me get this right, "Ah, Bawakawa Puse Puse," which everybody tried to read into, but it was just a phrase that came to him in a dream. I think it's one of John's most beguiling pieces of music, really. It's a song which never seems to get old for me. I think Imagine in many ways is played out, but I think number 9, Dream, for me anyway, it still has the edge. I don't think it's quite as played out. So the album climaxes, if you don't count the reprise, A Good Piece of Chance, with the Christmas song. Happy Christmas, War is Over, big Phil Spector production. John said that this had been written as an alternative to White Christmas, which I guess he thought was a bit played out. Recorded with the Harlem Community Choir. Quite a sizable hit in the UK, got to number 4. I suppose that song was a bit of a culmination, really. It was, 2 years or so of political activism that had started in spring of 1969 with the Bed-Ins. It's a fairly iconic song. It's certainly one which was played an awful lot after John's death. In fact, on this album you have 3 songs really, which have sadly come to be associated with that awful event, just because, they were played in tireless rotation after the event. You have Imagine, number 9, Dream, and Happy Christmas, War is Over. All 3 of those songs now have certain connotations which perhaps you wouldn't ideally want them to have. But anyway, a really, really interesting compilation and great artwork, and it was the final album to be released on Apple, which also makes it quite historically interesting. UK number 8, US number 12, so John was not topping the charts with this one, but after this he was due to disappear into the wilderness, not to emerge until 1980 for the Double Fantasy album, and then unfortunately we all know what transpired after that. Anyway, that will do for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned, I'll be back soon. Take care.